person who will speak to you is Dr. Elaine Gallagher. Elaine has worked in education for 50 years now, and she was a teacher for all levels, elementary, primary, and high school. She's currently an international consultant in education in Europe, in America. She's also been working with UNO since the beginning of the project. So I give you now on stage, Elaine.
Thank you, Cecilia. Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Today we're going to talk about CLIL, which is the very basic of what UNO is supposed to be about. Okay, the books, the teacher guide, some of the scope and sequence talk a little bit about CLIL. And what we're going to look at is that is the base. If you were going to go down to the bottom of UNO, wherever it started, the whole idea of the bilingual program with Portuguese and English or Spanish and English, from Pablo Doberti, the idea he wanted was he wanted a philosophy of CLIL. Does anybody already know a lot about CLIL? Does anybody know anything about CLIL? Nobody. Well, one or two people. Okay, well, that's good then. That's a good topic for you. We're going to move on then, and we're going to look at CLIL historically at first, because the importance of CLIL is that it promotes oral fluency. And in the 21st century, if you don't speak a language, you don't know the language. We don't really care if you can pass written exams and get a score of 900 on the TOEFL or, high scores on the Cambridge. If you can't speak it, you don't really know it. And that's what counts, because people that go through traditional language courses, what they do is they memorize grammar rules, they can conjugate verbs, they can read English, they can even understand it, but they can't speak it. If you don't speak it, you don't know it. Period. And that's what the premise of CLIL is about, and that's what we're going to look at today. So thank you for being here. First, we're going to look at the foundations of CLIL. Where did it really come from? It's not something that just came up overnight. CLIL started, not the word CLIL, or the acronym CLIL, but way back in the early 1900s, the early 20th century, we had the beginnings of the philosophy that eventually became CLIL, starting with some early psychological studies we're going to look at in a minute. After that, what started happening in the 1950s, we started having globalization. And that globalization, you woke up, okay, all right. What happened with the early globalization was the world started opening up after World War II. We had people becoming aware of languages that they never had been aware of before. International trade started, making bilingualism or trilingualism a necessity. Right now in Europe, for example, in 2015, they have a campaign called 2+1. They want you to speak your native language and English plus a third language. Okay, and here in Brazil, we're just barely moving to really make English as a recognized second language, because the economy of this country depends on the ability of people to speak English. Because all of you speak English, or you probably wouldn't be here, unless you're sort of curious to see what it sounds like. But if you know English, you know that many companies coming to Brazil are looking for people that speak English, and not just companies from the United States or Canada, but companies from China that are establishing here. The language they use for trade is English. Right now, 2015, there are more people that speak English in China than speak English in the United States. So we're talking, it's a movement that Brazil has to keep up with so that our economy will go up. It was number 5, now it's down to the 7th, because we're not being able to meet the competition with some companies that are looking for English speakers. Those are things we need to talk about, globalization. After globalization, what started happening in the 1980s, we started having psychologists and linguistic experts look at how do people learn a second language. And they had to study, how do you learn? Come on in, come on in, come on in. Only $5 to come in if you're late, okay. How to learn a second language really depends on how you learn the first one. So we need to look at that. And we're going to look at some of the studies done by Krashen, Lev Vygotsky. Once we started learning how people learn a second language, then in Europe, something started happening in the late 1980s. And what started happening in Europe is they noticed that all of their books of language teaching, and as you know, there's 17 different languages spoken in Europe. And all of their books had things like English for beginners, French for advanced students, intermediate German, basic, intermediate, average, and there was no general meaning of anything. Every editorial company had its own definition, and some editorial companies even had zero-level language. Well, I guess that means no brain in your head or something, because nobody has zero-level language. Think about it. Even a little baby at 3 months of age, if the mother goes, "Mama, mama," the baby starts moving its mouth, copying the mother. That's the beginning of language. And so in Europe, they started meeting in the 1980s for about 7 years in Switzerland, and various 27 countries met to come up with ideas of how can we organize language so that we don't have books that say intermediate, beginning, advanced. And they came up with something in 1991 called the Common European Framework of Reference. Does anybody know what that is, the CERF? Anybody know? 2 people know. That's good? Okay. Well, 3 people know. All right. You know because you work for UNO. No wonder. All right. Okay. I see UNO people over here. The thing is, this became very, very important because it took any language in the world and divided it into 6 levels: A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2, with C2 being the highest level, almost like a native speaker. This became very important because for once, editorial companies had to print in Europe. They had to put on the cover of their books the actual level, no more basic or beginning. By law, they had to start writing down where A1 or A2. And what it is, if you are interested, you can actually print it free on internet, or you can buy it from Cambridge University Press, and it's called Common European Framework. I'll show you in a minute. Because it's 265 pages full of graphs and different tables showing the 4 basic areas of any language: listening, speaking, reading, and writing, and what the characteristics are at A1 for reading, at A1 for speaking, what exhibits a person at A1 for listening and being able to read. And it has it all the way through. If you want a very shortened version, I do have it on my computer. I'll give you email at the end. If you write me email, I'll send you a short version, very short, not 265 pages, maybe 2 pages. Plus, I'll send you a self-test so you can test yourself and see what level you're at. Or at least you can use it with some of your students. So that became very, very important because once the Common European Framework was published in 1991, it became important. Educators started saying, "Oh, great, oh, wonderful, we now know the levels, but how are we going to teach to reach those levels?" For the first time, it became important how to teach a language. And because of these basic studies that started in the early 20th century, we know that learning a language using grammar gets you nowhere. Okay? Grammar is how a language works. That's what grammar is, how a language works. It explains how the language is established. And grammar changes. If any of you study English grammar, you will know that over the years it's changed. It's still changing. For example, when I was a kid, nobody could use the word ain't. Okay? Ain't, my mother would say, ain't isn't in the dictionary. Now it's in the dictionary. Okay? And you see ain't everywhere. Even with multi-educated people with 3 or 4 college degrees. They ain't going anywhere. You listen to country western music, she ain't done me no good. You know, like a double, triple negative or something. The thing is that grammar is how a language works. And when people learn a language using grammar as their initial approach to the language, they can't speak it. They may be able to say, I am, you are, he is, she is, you are, they are, we are. But in my whole life, nobody ever came up and asked me to do that. They talk to me, hey, how you doing? What's going on, man? What's going on? You have to speak the language. Nobody asked me to conjugate a verb. If you ask me, Elaine, quick, give me a sentence using past perfect participle of something, I don't even know what you're talking about. I can't do it. I might not even be able to identify it. Can I use it? Yes. If you give me a sample, I could copy it. But that's not speaking a language. And that's what we need to start learning a language in a natural way. So once this Common European Framework was done, what started happening is educators started meeting worldwide. They started meeting in Helsinki, Finland, under the direction of Dr. David Marsh, and they came up with a philosophy of how to teach a language. That philosophy is, they now call it CLIL, and that's what today's about. So we're going to look at these steps and see what happened so you can understand the background. It wasn't just something that somebody invented overnight to make some money. It was an explanation of how we best learn a language. So let's go on with that and go back and look at this poor guy. Look at him. He's dead, okay? Just so you know, I'll tell you the end of the story at the beginning. This is Dr. Lev Vygotsky. Lev Vygotsky was from Russia. He died at the age of 37 from tuberculosis. And he was a social psychologist and came up with ideas of how people learn a language. And his ideas, after 1962, his works were finally published in the West, and we started finding out, wow, this guy in the 1920s and 30s had ideas about and theories and proofs of how people learn a language. He had 3 basic theories and themes which are part of the whole language acquisition idea leading to Dr. Stephen Krashen's work. His first thing is a language is social. We learn to speak by our social relationships, as opposed to some people who think first you learn language and then you become social. No. You learn a language socially. When your mother says, oh, what a cute little girl, you look like your grandmother. Oh, what a cute little girl, you look like me. Oh, what a cute little girl, you look like my lover. All right. And so they move on. Kids start hearing the language, that social interaction. The second theme of Dr. Vygotsky is his whole idea of what he calls the MKO, the most knowledgeable other. It's a theory that's logical. And it means that we learn, you and I, we all learn from somebody who knows more than we do. Otherwise, how are we going to learn? And when you think about it, you say, well, that makes common sense, you know? How are we going to learn if we don't have somebody with us, near us, working with us, that knows more than we do? Now, that doesn't necessarily have to be a teacher. It could be a parent. It could be another kid that's learning if you're a child. Whoever's the most knowledgeable other. And the third segment of his major psychological theme was dealing also with the area of growth, which he talks about the zone of proximal development. What Dr. Vygotsky says is our growth as a person is the difference between what we can do with support, called scaffolding. A scaffold is something that holds up a building when you're painting it outside, for example. What can we do with scaffolding, and what can we do by ourselves? That difference is the zone of proximal development. That's where we grow. And how that happens, how is that connected with CLIL philosophy today? Let's look at these 3 areas. The first influence is social interactions. And as you know, every language is social. Otherwise, we wouldn't talk. There's some very interesting studies of very rare people who sort of got lost on an island when they were like 2 years old, and they got found when they were like 14. Somehow they survived, and they did, and they can't speak. And it becomes practically impossible for them to learn a language because the receivers of sounds that go to their brain, they get recorded as sounds, they can't be transmitted. They grunt like animals, and it's very difficult. There's some interesting studies on language acquisition of people who had no human contact. Very interesting. And so social interaction is essential. Another study was done after World War II of babies after World War II that were orphans and brought up in hospitals, with a nurse only coming maybe to prop up a bottle of milk or change a diaper maybe once a day. The babies had very little social interaction, and they all, invariably, these babies had very low IQs, supposedly IQs, and very low language ability. And we now know it was because they had not much human contact. The second part of development of language is the most knowledgeable other, and this really supports teamwork, cooperative learning, collaborative learning that I know your coaches are prepared to work with you on, and that's something very important in your schools. It's not just the teacher staying in front, blah, 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 take notes, blah, 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 take notes. Nobody learns that way, okay? You don't learn that way. You might shut your mouth, copy down, but you don't really learn things. You survive school instead of enjoying school. I was lucky I enjoyed school. I had good teachers, and this was before the age of any of this knowledge. I just had good teachers. In kindergarten, I was a bad kid, okay? Because in kindergarten, you had to take a nap. I said, I'm not going to take a nap. I haven't taken a nap since I was 2 months of age. You think I'm going to take a nap at 5? And the teacher would say, lay down, take a nap. There's but I'm not tired. You know, I haven't taken a nap since 2 months of age. My mother says I'm her worst nightmare. You're my worst nightmare too, take a nap. Well, I wouldn't take a nap. I became very disobedient in kindergarten. It was a public kindergarten. So I was the first of 5 kids. My father took me out of kindergarten. I'm going to put you with the nuns. They're going to straighten you out. Well, he put me with the nuns, and he saved my life educationally, because at the first day of school, when Sister Harold said, "Children, it's 11:30, time for a nap." Oh, no, I thought I got rid of this in kindergarten. "What did you say, Miss Gallagher?" "Nothing, sister." "Don't tell me lies. God is watching." Well, I couldn't argue with God, so I told her, I said, "I don't want to take a nap. I'm not tired. I haven't taken a nap since I was 2 months of age." And my mother said I'm her worst nightmare. Instead of the nun agreeing that I was her worst nightmare also, she said, "Don't worry. Everybody has a different level of activity. Kids, take your nap, put your heads on your desk, relax a little for 20 minutes. Elaine, come with me." I left the bad kids, and she took me near the closet, and she gave me a broom. And she said, "While they're taking a nap, you can sweep the halls." I very happily swept the halls, and when I got done, she gave me a cookie. It was a win-win situation. I learned at almost 6 years of age to keep busy, speak up for what you want, and you get a cookie at the end. And that social interaction stayed with me, because the nuns always did that. I talked a lot. And my mother and father would say, "You talk too much, shut your mouth, put tape over your mouth, you talk too much." But the nuns would say, "You like to talk? Get in drama club. You like to talk? Get in the debate club. You like to open your mouth? Get in the choir, sing on Sundays." And I did. And so at high school, when we had our yearbook, I didn't get nominated and voted for the most popular, or the most intelligent, or the most ambitious. My team voted me the most talkative. And my father said, the most talkative. Why not the most beautiful, the most ambitious, the most intelligent? "I don't know, Daddy. I don't think I talk very much." Well, I just want you to know, when we're talking about language here, that I'm 72 years old, and now people pay me to talk. So I'm saying that, thank you. I'm saying that because with your students, we want oral fluency. Don't tell them to shut up and be quiet and listen to the teacher. Tell them, "Hey, share your ideas with us. Channel your ideas. Take a broom and sweep the halls." That's what this is about. Most knowledgeable other. There were people around me who knew things. And the second thing here is a zone of proximal development. My zone of growing as a student really affected me as a teacher, because I knew that because I had had teachers who asked weird questions outside the classroom, I wasn't born weird. I grew to be weird. Because weird is good and normal is boring. Because I learned that from my teachers, and that's what we're talking about here. The zone of your growth depends on how much your kids can do with a little support, psychological as well as academic, and what they can do on their own. And we really need to work on this. The second thing that we have in language development after Vygotsky was Dr. Stephen Krashen. He's still alive, okay? Vygotsky's gone, he's dead, but that's all right. His theories live on. Dr. Stephen Krashen's from the United States, and he has done and is still doing more than 40 years of language acquisition, development, and research. And what he has found studying over 20,000 students is that we learn a language better by acquiring it. That means using songs, music, phys ed, group activities, teaching geography, history, math, using a language, than by studying a language using the grammar translation method. The grammar translation method really was the way Latin had been taught. When you think about it, when I was a kid, a long time ago, I got out of high school in 1960, and the only course I could take as a language in 1955 to 60 was Latin. You took Latin or Latin, there was no choice. So we learned how to conjugate verbs and translate Latin to English, English to Latin. We learned all the battles of Julius Caesar. We learned the maps of Italy. I really liked it because it had history involved. But we never spoke Latin because all the Romans were dead. There was nobody to talk to. And what happens when we use the grammar translation method of trying to teach English the same way Latin had been taught, we end up with a bunch of kids who can translate, they can conjugate verbs, and they can't speak a sentence. They can't go to McDonald's and order a hamburger. So we have to start looking at how can we do this, and that was what Stephen Krashen's work has been doing, and how he's been relating this whole idea to what he calls the natural approach. And the natural approach really has 4 ingredients. The first one is that recognition precedes production. Your students can recognize when you say something, like I have a little baby over here, 2 years old. Hi, Susie, give me the purse, give me the purse. She only speaks Portuguese, of course. Give me the purse. Thank you, Susie. Now, a little kid, 2 years old, can respond to a language, okay? They can respond. They might not know exactly what you're saying. They certainly can't translate it, but they get the image by what you're pointing to and giving them an indication, okay? If I want to teach you Japanese or Chinese, and I might say, okay, ni hao, ni hao, ni hao. Ni hao. Oh, good boy, Danny, good boy. Okay, kids learn that way. They can recognize things, but they can't produce them yet. And this is what Krashen has done most of his 40 years of research in, showing that when we want to have language coming from somebody's brain, they have to actually first understand it, listen to it, hear it enough times, and eventually they can reproduce it. An example, I acquired Spanish when I was 43 years of age. Acquired it. I didn't study it. I acquired it. I moved from the northeast part of the United States to the southwest on the border with Mexico. And the parents, I was teaching high school at that time, and the parents of my students did not speak English. They were American citizens, but they didn't speak English. I think they were legal. If they were, I don't really care. I believe in open boundaries, okay? I'm like one of those anarchists. I don't really believe in immigration. Let anybody come in, you know, law of supply and demand. Free enterprise. If you work hard, you survive. If you don't, you die. Too bad. Okay. So what happened is I went to live on the border of Texas, and I had to learn Spanish. So I was a widow at that time. I had 2 kids, 2 teenagers. I sent them to visit my parents back in Maine. We moved to Texas. And I said, go visit Grandpa. I'll see you in 6 weeks. I'm going to go study. So I went to a language institute in Mexico for 6 weeks. And my courses, I didn't know anything about it. My colleagues told me, hey, there's this school down in Mexico, 5 hours from here by driving. It's for gringos like you that can learn, 6 weeks fast without putting a computer chip in my brain. So I went, I saw the list of courses that I was going to be taking that summer, and I saw things like the Historia de Hombre en Mexico. Everything was in Spanish. The history of geography, music, Mexican cooking, Latin American history, geography. And there was no grammar on the list of the 7 subjects I was to take all day. So I asked the director, I said, Mr. Valdez, why is there no grammar here? Because I knew nothing about language acquisition. This was 1982. And he said, there's no grammar here because grammar is an impediment to fluency. Write that down. Grammar is an impediment to fluency. He said, once you get fluent in the language, you can start gradually learning language and learning the grammar. But here for 6 weeks, you're only going to hear Spanish. Nobody's going to come up and say, poor little American girl, we're going to translate so you can understand. Everything's in Spanish. And he meant it. And the first week, I had a headache physically because of the frustration of not understanding anything and not being able to communicate. I'd go into the class, and all it sounded like to my ears in 1982, well, this was the summer now of 83, was blah, 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 blah. I could not tell where one word began and one word ended. And by the second week, it was blah, 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 esteca, blah, blah, maya, blah, 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 escritorio, blah, 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 pantalla. I could start identifying some words. They told us, you got to copy everything. They said it in Spanish. You have to copy everything we say when we say it. And do what we do in the language development class, the vocabulary development. So I'd copy them, and we'd practice saying, mucho gusto, mucho gusto, mucho gusto, mucho gusto. I didn't know what I was saying. I could have been saying, your mother is ugly, your mother is ugly, your mother is ugly, your mother is ugly. All right, okay. So that kind of thing we eventually learned. We learned how to sing in Spanish. There were a lot of things we learned, but by the end of 5 weeks, almost 1 week left, one of my teachers said to me in Spanish, how many people here know Spanish? Okay, well, If you don't know it, too bad. I'm gonna show you my Spanish. So at the end of 5 weeks, one of my teachers said to me, Maestra, tengo un amigo, un solterón. Es un abogado en la universidad. Es muy tranquilo, muy pacífico, un poco tímido, y él necesita una mujer loca como tú. Ah, you understood Spanish, okay. So what happened is we met, and I had 1 more week to study, and then the course was done. I was armed with enough Spanish to tell lies to the parents of my students. Now, why do I want to tell lies? Because I can't go to a parent and say, excuse me, Mrs. Sanchez, your son is driving me nuts. He never shuts his mouth. Bad education, your son. No, now I was able to say to her in Spanish, and I'll do it in translation. First, I'll do it in Spanish, then in English. Señora Sanchez, felicidades. Tu hijo tiene un regalo de Dios para hablar como tú no sabes. Okay? You understood, huh? If you didn't understand, what I said is, Mrs. Sanchez, congratulations, your son has the gift of God to speak like you don't know. And so what happens is the kids are happy because I don't insult them to their parents. And I was learning the necessity of being able to be fluent in a second language. And my career as a teacher changed because I started becoming more interested in bilingual education than just teaching history and geography to high school and middle school kids. So this is what happened here. I could recognize things before I could produce them. Eventually, I became to produce them, as you can see now. The other thing, the second ingredient of Krashen's natural approach is acquisition activities get better results than learning grammar. Singing a song, baking a cake. You know, you can use Beatles songs. Yesterday I tried to sing, I'm going to try again. Yesterday I choked, so we'll see what happened. But Beatles songs are very easy because the language, the word vocabulary is second grade level. So you ready? You're armed with my water? No, all right. Okay, but just to start, if any of you know the song Yesterday? Okay, so we can all sing it together. Help me out. Yesterday, all my troubles seem so far away. Now I know that they are here to stay. Oh, I believe in yesterday. Suddenly, life was not the game it used to be. There's a shadow hanging over me. Oh, I believe in yesterday. Why he had to go, I don't know. He wouldn't say. I said something wrong, now I long for yesterday. Yesterday. Okay, students, you did English very well. Yay! Bravo! Weird is good and normal is boring. This is my English class for you. Go home and sing. When you go home today and mom says, what did you do today in school, mijito? Don't say nada. Don't say I didn't learn anything. Because that's what kids do. That's what they do. They go home and mom says, what did you do in school today? And they say, thank you. This is my vodka for the day. No, it's just water. It's really water, right, Danny? Okay, it's water. All right, thank you. Okay. So what happens is we have this kind of idea that class has to follow a book. The UNO book is not a book to be followed like a recipe book. It's your guide. It's your support. You have to bring in your ideas. And that's what Krashen's talking about. Recognition precedes production. We have to have acquisition activities so the kids start acquiring a language, so they start liking the language, and it's fun for them to come to. A third element of the whole natural approach is reduce the filter. What does a car filter do, an oil filter? What does it do? Do you know? Do you know, Susie? What does an oil filter do in a car? It protects, okay, thank you. It separates the dirt from the clean stuff. Okay, she's going like that. That's good. That's language. All right. That's acquisition. Good. All right. So what it does is, Krashen said that when people don't want to hear anything, they put up a filter. And they separate what's being taught from what gets into their brain. You know the kids that sit in class like this, they're quiet, they don't bother anybody, but they sit in class like this? They sort of don't move. Sometimes they sit like this. Sometimes they might even have their head on the desk. Not in my class, because I go along and bang the desk, wake them up, okay? Or maybe I go sing in their ear. That really drives them a little bit crazy. Uh-oh, what's the crazy teacher going to do now? Weird is good, normal is boring. And I tell them that message. The fourth part of this whole idea of the natural approach is that you use material. This is one of the strongest things that CLIL supports, and the strongest thing that we have in UNO is that we teach material in English so that the kids can acquire English. So they get social studies and science and music and geography and stories to read in the language we're trying to teach them. Otherwise, it just becomes a boring subject for them. And they'll say things like, I hate English. English sucks. I don't like English at all. I mean, whatever the kids, teenagers use in Brazil, I don't know. That's what they say in classes that are not very interesting. But when we have teachers, for example, I know a teacher's name is Dan Gutierrez, and he's really dynamic and he's really strange. And for example, when he's teaching World War II history in English, he brings in, he found on internet a copy of a letter handwritten by President Roosevelt. And he shows the letter and talks about the bombing of Pearl Harbor, things that are barely mentioned in the UNO book in English in Mexico. But he uses that and brings it into his class because internet has everything you can use, everything that you need to support your teaching. And that's what we're looking for, is teaching support. So when we have these people, and CLIL and Krashen, how do his things apply? These are the ways they apply. What happens is Krashen has coined the phrase comprehensible input. Comprehensible input means something that goes into your brain that the kids can understand. It does not make sense to me as a native English speaker, I am, you are, he is, she is, you are, we are, they are, or to be able to write down a list of 30 different prepositions. Who really cares, okay? In the big, long scheme of thing, who cares? I want to be able to go into McDonald's and say, I want a hamburger, please, with some cheese and some onions and mustard. I can't do that by going and say, I want, I am, you are, he is, she is, you are, we are, they are. They might give me a few guys extra that I don't really need, okay? So these kinds of things are very important, and it's what we are supporting with UNO. And all of these are the foundations of the whole CLIL philosophy. Now, before CLIL existed as a word, CLIL stands for Content and Language Integrated Learning. All of these programs, I know you can't read them, and I don't intend you to read them. It was just to give an impact of all the different programs that were investigated by the Europeans and Canadians when they were working in Helsinki for 3 years to come up with some kind of a philosophy. And they looked at all these kinds of things, and they decided, what are we going to support? And they decided, number one, we're going to support oral fluency. That was the first thing that we want, oral fluency. The second thing, we're going to use acquisition of a language, using materials to be taught. And these kinds of things started out with Lev Vygotsky in the 1920s and 30s, continued in the 1980s with Stephen Krashen, and eventually with the people working in Helsinki under Dr. David Marsh, we started ending up with what we call now CLIL, Content and Language Integrated Learning. What I told you about before, the Common European Framework of Reference, these 6 levels, almost every country in the world has now adopted these as their levels of teaching any language. This has been going on in Europe since 1991. Mexico adopted this in 2008 as the official federal program, because I also work for the Mexican government, working on their English program and writing books for English teachers in English. My Spanish isn't good enough to write a book in it. But these levels are how we have our books organized with UNO. We're using them, basing them, usually in a bilingual school. I mean, and I'm talking a real bilingual school, bi meaning two, a school that has a half a day of English and half a day of Spanish, which is very rare in Brazil, but it's fairly common in Mexico. Because there's a big difference. Here in Brazil, as you know, Portuguese has been the accepted language and emphasized, and many people think, you learn a second language going to a language institute, or you take a course outside of school. That never became a psychological impulse in Mexico. In Mexico, for at least 22 years, public schools have been offering English free 3 times a week for 45 minutes. It's not a lot. And we've had bilingual schools, a half a day English, a half a day Spanish, for more than 30 years, and at least 1,000 private schools. So English has been being pushed over there because Mexico was one of the first countries that American and Canadian companies went to expand, and it became an economic necessity. It's not because people say, oh, wow, we want to learn English because the United States is our neighbor. They don't really care, okay? They don't care who's their neighbor. They care who's going to give me money, who's going to pay me. And speaking English, not translating English, speaking English brings money. And it will happen here in Brazil as more and more people learn English. You're opening up doors for your students. So these kinds of levels, if you want a summary of them, just write to me, email, and I'll be glad to give you an explanation of a little bit more. This is Dr. David Marsh, who was the head of the group meeting, the 27 countries meeting in Helsinki over several years to come up with a philosophy. Remember, CLIL is not a method or a program, it's a philosophy of how we best learn a language. And the first one of these is that we want students of varied abilities together. This implies that you do not get really good success when you have a group of low students together and intermediate English students together and advanced English students together. That perpetuates a class system in language, and nobody really rises as highly as they should. For example, the bottom group seems to always stay in that group. They never really go up. And the high group doesn't get high because the teachers get lazy, frankly. They say, oh, well, these kids are pretty smart. Okay, go home and read 3 chapters tonight, and tomorrow I'll give you a quiz. That's not teaching, that's babysitting. Teaching is what I'm doing. I'm teaching. I'm moving around, I'm talking. If you were my students in school, you'd probably be in desks arranged in a semicircle. I don't like the row things, but hey, come on, I can't change the whole world at once. But these are the kinds of ideas we're talking about, is teaching. The second thing that's important of the basic concept is cooperative learning. Because of the studies we know from Dr. Lev Vygotsky, how the most knowledgeable other and the way we learn is from others, working with teams. There's a lot of brain studies proving this, which I'm going to show you in a minute, some results of brain studies. These things are supported by UNO, and there's projects in every bimester, and I'll show you a few of those in a minute. Integrated curriculum, science, social studies. If the kids are studying, for example, if they're studying science and they're looking at natural disasters, they're also going to be studying some geography of where these things happen and looking at maps. Another thing is the integrated curriculum, which we have already briefly talked about, and the transdisciplinary approach, and learning a second or third language through subject matter. That's what UNO's about. We do not have a grammar-based teaching. We mention grammar. We teach some grammar concepts, but we don't focus on grammar, okay? Because if a student in 3rd grade says to me in English, I go to my grandmother's last night, I would correct her and say, oh, you went to your grandmother's last night. And probably the child will say, yes, I went. I would say, hey, wait a minute, what do you mean go? Are you dumb or what? We've been talking about past tense for 3 weeks, you're still in present tense. That's what a grammar-based teacher talks like to kids when you're not around to listen if you're school directors, because I hear, okay? I'm like the invisible person seeping through the schools listening. What do I hear? And it bothers me sometimes what I hear in school, because school should be a place of joy. School should be a place where kids go in the morning and say, hey, Mom, like, wait a minute, who had it? Oh, all right, you have a daughter that started school yesterday at 2 years of age, right? And I saw her all happy and smiling, 2 years old. Oh, puppy, I'm going to school. I'm going to school. What happens by 5th grade? School sucks. I hate this. It's boring. The teachers just blah, blah, blah all day long. That's what happens. We do that when school stops being fun. And you can have fun and learn at the same time. Okay? How do I know? Because that's how I teach. That's how people around me teach. I used to teach primary school, lower grades. Unfortunately for me, the kids didn't get my jokes. So I had to move to higher levels, like middle school, high school, college. They get my jokes. I have sort of weird humor. But I like to teach, and I like to make teaching fun and learning fun for the kids. For example, and this is one of the things about the whole CLIL approach, is that I tell students, in this class, nobody's going to fail. You're all going to work. Failure is not an option. Well, invariably, there's some student that raises his hand, and he says, I'm going to fail, I'm dumb. Everybody tells me I'm dumb. Okay, so I go to that kid for like 10 seconds, and I look him in the eye for like 10 seconds, don't say anything. So all my students will say, what's the crazy teacher going to do now? Is she going to get mad or what? Carlos, behind your eyes, I see a young man that's pretty intelligent. Okay, maybe you're not getting good grades, and maybe you have been failing, but that's going to stop. Because now you're going to start fixing your mistakes. We're all going to help you. I'm going to help you. You're going to help yourself. Because you're not going to fail. Okay, I'm not going to give you a grade. You're going to work for it, but you are going to pass. Is that clear? Okay, so we shake hands. Now, that doesn't solve problems because maybe he is dumb, okay? My job is to get him out of that hole that he's in. So the first test comes. Maybe I give a vocabulary test. I do not give multiple choice tests. Those are only for people that are lucky in Las Vegas. It doesn't mean you really know anything. You don't have to know anything, and you can pass that test. I don't give matching. I don't give true false. I give true brain tests. I give you the vocabulary words, and you can define it any way you want. It takes me a little longer to correct. If I give him, if DNA is one of the vocabulary words, and he writes DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, I accept it. If he writes DNA is because my grandfather and I both have blue eyes, I accept it. If he draws me a double helix, I accept it. If he puts little bolitos and says, these are amino acids, they are on DNA, I accept it. We work on vocabulary for concept, not for memorized definition. So his first vocabulary test, Carlitos over here, he only gets a 4 out of 10. And he says, I failed. Hey, you didn't fail. That's just your first draft. Some kids do the first draft. You might have to do a second draft. You fix your mistakes. She can help you because she got a little bit better score. This is called the zone of proximal development, okay? Just if you want psychological definitions. You help each other. You fix your mistakes with your words, and you give it to me tomorrow or this afternoon. Okay, tomorrow, first hour, not in the afternoon, in the morning, coming to school, and I give you the basic for passing. Okay, whether it's a 6 or whatever, okay? But you're going to pass. You're not going to fail. And each time you do a little bit better, you're going to... And so this is what we do. We help the kids to move along. Because if you don't know it, you grow. The other thing, students, besides not failing, I do not give written homework. No written homework in this class, guys. You accept that? You like that? Oh, you like that? Okay, no written homework. Why? Because I don't know who really did it. I only correct work you do in my class. Your homework is going to be brain work, not written work. I want you to investigate, look on internet, research things, interview somebody, study what we did in class today, watch a program on TV to discuss in class that will expand your brain. Go play with a Game Boy. That makes your brain neurons move. And they say, wow, this teacher's really weird. Yes, I'm weird. But you're going to come here and you're going to learn and you're going to work. I don't give you written assignments in class. Okay, just short ones. Okay, so CLIL, what it is basically, it's a philosophy of how people learn a language. It's not a method or a program. It's just plain good teaching. And that's what we're talking about here with UNO. This is what we want. Good teaching, not mediocre teaching, not passable teaching. I want excellent teachers, and we can develop you to be an excellent teacher. That's what we have coaches. We have a lot of people that can support you and support your staff, and that's what we're here for. Okay, going on a little bit more with this whole idea of CLIL and what we're going to be looking at. Basically, these are the kinds of things of what CLIL includes. Knowledge of the subject and all of this. Errors are a natural part of learning, and what you do is you fix your mistakes. If you knew everything, if she answers me the wrong question, I'll say, hey, don't worry. If you knew everything, I wouldn't have a job. And I tell that to the kids a lot. Hey, don't worry. If you knew everything, I wouldn't have a job. And we tell them that, and I mean that, and sometimes they finish the sentence for me after they had me as a teacher for a couple of months. So when we look along in some of these things, say, okay, what are we doing in CLIL? All of these things, I'm not going to read them to you. You can all read yourself. All of these things are characteristics of what would be going on in a CLIL classroom based on research from Lev Vygotsky, based on research from Dr. Stephen Krashen, based on investigations by leading educators and linguistic experts in Europe that founded this whole idea of this philosophy of CLIL. So these are the things that you would be using and doing in your classroom. Now, how to adapt them in the classroom, how to apply CLIL, again, you vary the materials you use. Okay, you have team activities, pair work, and music, arts, crafts, all the things we've talked about. And remember that recognition precedes production. And the last thing down here, what we talked about, errors are okay. Fix them. How can anybody fail if you let them fix them? I was a terrible math student, okay? Terrible. My parents paid tutors for me to take Algebra 2 in high school, and only because I was, flattering the teacher did I pass math. I don't have a mathematical brain. I only have one intelligence, linguistic. I am linguistic, I admit that. But if you show me words in English with scrambled letters, I cannot unscramble them. If you give me a word search puzzle and I have to go diagonally or backwards and find words, I can't do it. It doesn't mean I don't know English. It means that my brain doesn't work that way. So in education, we have to recognize multiple intelligences. We have to recognize the different ways that kids learn. This is all part of the philosophy of CLIL, that you fix your mistakes. Everybody doesn't learn the same way. So when we talk about learning and all of these things, I only have like 6 minutes left. There's a lot of things, like activities like this. I'll just give you a couple of these, and we're not going to do a lot of them. I have a lot to show you, but we're just going to skip through to get ideas of things you can put on the board once a week or once every few days to get the kids to think outside the book. For example, over here on the left is a sentence in English. Can anybody tell me what that sentence is, the top left? What does that say? It's an English sentence. Duh. This is called critical thinking. Don't worry, teachers, students can't do this either until you start showing them more and more, and they eventually get it. Can anybody figure it out? Somebody figured it out. Who figured it out? What did you say? Yes. Who said it? I understand. 50 points. You get 50 points today. All right. I understand. Because I is under the word stand. Okay, so that's I understand. What's the next one? All right, everybody got 50 points just between you and me. This group is smarter than yesterday's. Did you guys get the homework answers from your colleagues? That was it, see? They're cheating. That's why I don't give any written homework. Now you know why. Okay, what do we have? This one on the left bottom. Ha ha ha. Ha ha. I'm going to move you on because I only have a few minutes left. I'll tell you what it is just because you're my friends, sort of. All right? Okay? I met in Brazil. This one on the left bottom is 4 degrees below zero. Ah, now you get it. And this one on the right bottom, anybody know? It's the name of a musical entity. The Unfinished Symphony. Okay. All right, let's go on. I have a lot of these kinds of things I could show you eventually, but basically, brain studies show by Dr. Tomas Ortiz, he's a colleague of mine in Madrid, and he's done a lot of brain studies actually looking at neurons of kids. He takes a small microscopic section of their brainstem and studies their neurons, and he realizes that all of us are born with about 200 million neurons. And it's not the number of neurons that makes us smart. It's when those neurons move and touch each other, they form an electric impulse called a synapses. More synapses, the faster your students learn. Now the secret is, how do we move the neurons? This is not how. Okay, you're going to be smart, I'm moving your neurons. No, there's 2 ways. 1, group activities. 2, physical development. If you have little babies, little kids, let them crawl on the floor, play with them, move their hands and legs, and let them play with balls until around 5 or 6 years of age, at least. So their neurons develop, forming synapses, they learn better. When kids work in pairs or groups up to about 4 or 5 kids maximum, beyond that it becomes chaos, they also learn more. These are things we know from brain studies. In UNO, we have group work examples. We have, this is a class graph that kids in kindergarten can make. And the teacher shows them how to do a group activity using an UNO book, and they maybe graph and plot how many like eggs for breakfast, how many like cereal for breakfast. When we get every single grade, every bimester, there are projects. Here's another sample project in 4th and 5th grade, which is comparing travel, train travel, and connecting a growing nation. And what they do is the kids study the train development in the United States and compare it with Brazil. They do map work, they watch short films. The whole idea is for them to compare and do group work together as a team. When we get to secondary, the kids study natural disasters. But you don't just say, okay, kids, start reading the book. That's super boring. You don't have the kids read aloud if you want to get comprehension. If you want comprehension, you guide them to reading and guide them with questions. You might show them a picture. This is not in your UNO book, but you find it in internet. You might say, okay, kids, we're going to start a unit on natural disasters. What do you think this is a picture of? What does it look like? What? Oh, who said it? All right, that's 100 points. Nobody knew it yesterday. Somebody yesterday said, it looks like a crack. I said, oh, I can think of a crack in my body, but I'm not really thinking. And she said the correct thing. How did you know that? You teach, well, you got 100 points. Because what she just said is this, and I let the kids guess, and then I showed them the answer afterwards. This is a San Andreas fault in California, one of the largest geological faults. And we talk about that and show the kids that a fault can actually be seen. All earthquakes are not caused by invisible cracks under the earth. Okay, and oral fluency is a major CLIL objective. I have on my computer many, many stories that I wrote that I'll be glad to share with you. This one is called The Little Lost Baby Fish. I'm not going to read it to you. It's only 3 pages. I have a bunch of them to read aloud. It takes about 3 or 4 minutes to read it aloud. And then there's questions after them, like, were you ever lost? Were you ever scared? And it shows them how to make an art activity. And there's questions, for example, thought questions that you might use this guide. Somebody wanted, but so then. You can use that for anything, for high school, for kindergarten. Somebody wanted, but so then. And this story that I just briefly showed you about the little lost baby fish, the somebody was the little lost fish. And what did he want? Well, he got lost from his family. He wanted to find them, but he was lost. Whoops, what happened? Uh-oh. She rescued me. Okay. I don't know what I touched, but God knows. Critical thinking techniques, that's okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Cecilia. Okay, so somebody, the baby fish, wanted to find his family, but he got lost. So he searched for them, and then he found them. These little activities, you can use this somebody wanted, but so then for anything. It can be for an adult movie. It could be for Jerry Maguire. It could be for anything. When you're reading a novel, you're reading in secondary Pavana's Journey, or you're reading The Giver, and you ask, okay, who's this somebody? The giver, okay, what did he want, etc. So you can use this simple formula to get the kids to work. It's not in your UNO book. These are things that we just share with you to change. You have to go beyond the book, teachers and directors. Be creative. Be weird. Why? Because weird is good and normal is boring. Remember that. Make a t-shirt and put that on your t-shirt for your school motto, okay? Keep things simple. Don't be complicated. Use personal experiences. Good teaching inspires students. You want your kids to go home from school and say, wow, Mom, I didn't know that we could see cracks in the earth when there's an earthquake. Those are the kinds of things that kids remember. They don't always remember what they read in the book, but they do remember the incidental things that you bring to them as part of your teaching, and that's super important. There's a lot of different activities we can share with you, but remember, to think is difficult, which is why many people prefer to judge. We want to teach our kids to think. This is from Carl Jung, Dr. Jung. This was part of his psychology, that we want to teach this to kids, that we want them to think, and we want them to challenge the students. So I have a lot of activities. I'm not going to have time to do them with you, so too bad. You'll have to just find them. And this one, you got to find out which number doesn't belong. Ta-da, take your picture quickly. Raimundo. All right, he's ready to move on. All right. Oh, wait a minute, I gotta go back. At the bottom of this one, it says, ask me for facts of the week. I think you do have them in your platform. If you haven't seen them, look, I wrote 300 facts of the week, different trivia. For example, what animal for its size has the largest brain? The answer is, ta-da, ta-da, ta-da. Nobody knows? The answer is the ant. 1/3 of the ant's body is a brain. Okay? These kinds of questions I wrote, I submitted them to Santiana to put on our platform, but if you don't have it, I have it on my computer here in my hotel. I don't know which hotel I'm in, Premier, whatever that is, and you can find them, or email me. My email's at the end. Here's a brain puzzle. Now they have to find what letter is missing. Again, I'm not going to give you the answer, but these are things we can do. And solving this. What are these numbers? What do they signify? These are things I put on the board. Usually, I do, as a teacher, I do it every day, but I only see my students every other day because I have them for 90-minute blocks, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 1 week, Tuesday, Thursday, the next. I really like block scheduling. As a teacher, it gave me more time to do things. So I would put these on. I want my kids thinking all the time. If they don't know the answer, I don't tell them. I say, okay, see who can come in with it. Ask grandma, look it up on internet, think. Okay, these kinds of things, critical thinking activity. Here's another one. Again, there's a picture. I gotta quickly, I don't want to show you how to solve it. It's gone, how to solve it. Only if you get a copy of this one can you get it. These are the critical thinking skills we want for UNO. All of these things are in the activities in your books. Finding the main idea, finding, comparing and contrasting, solving puzzles, thinking outside the book, as well as using the book as your guide, but it's not your Bible. And the future of CLIL, well, it's not going to disappear, that's for sure, because finally, educators and parents and school leaders now agree, you know what? This philosophy works. We started a project, I started working with the Comunidad de Madrid 9 years ago, and we had 0 English in the public schools. And the Common European Framework said, if you don't put English as a second language, we're stopping your funding in Spain. You're the most backward country in Europe for English. And so from day to night, they fired, in Madrid alone, they fired 2,000 Spanish teachers. They replaced them with English teachers. They made the public school program a half a day of English, a half a day of Spanish. 9 years ago, starting with kindergarten. Then the next year, kindergarten, first grade. Right now, they're all the way through up to high school. And the language ability and oral fluency of the students is amazing. I bring people from Mexico, for example, that I work with. I live in Mexico when I'm not living in an airplane. Sometimes I live in the United States. Sometimes I live in Madrid. But I travel a lot. But I bring people from Mexico to visit some schools in Madrid, and their mouths are open like, wow, how did they do this change? That's what we're talking about with UNO. We're supporting change here, and that's what we want is the future of UNO. So when students learn material better, they learn it from a second language because we use better examples. We use graphics. We explain more clearly, and these things make a difference. And all of us have to have vision. And what is it? It's seeing things that other people can't see yet. Maybe it's your crystal ball on your table. Whatever it is, you have to have vision to be an educator. And these are the things we're supporting in UNO. Our vision is fluency in English and one second language. We need to work on Portuguese to bring up the vocabulary level of the kids. Some teachers tell me that the English vocabulary level is higher than what the kids have in Portuguese. It's not because our English level is too high in English, it's that the Portuguese level is too low. I mean, some of the words the kids learn in 3rd or 4th grade need to be more difficult because the kids are smarter than we think. They really are. And that's why school is boring when it's too easy. So teachers, let's go back because we have Pablo Doberte here somewhere hiding over here. Where are you, Pablo? Whoops. Okay, Pablo, who's out sick, unfortunately had an operation last Friday. But he said 4 years ago, I guess we don't want to see Pablo, do we? Okay. He said 4 years ago, we can't expect changes in education if there's no changes in the classroom. And the changes in the classroom begin with you, and with you, and with you, and with you. Whether you're a teacher, a coach, or a school supervisor, or director, the change begins with you. Don't wait for somebody else to change. Just as I said yesterday morning, change begins with you, okay? And that's what we're talking about. Now, if you want a copy of this, I know they're going to put it online. If you want anything that I mentioned, I will give you, like Facts of the Week, short stories, the Common European Framework. My email is on the next one. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I think my email is down here, way at the bottom. Elaine Gallagher is my name. My email are my 2 dogs, juniorbarney1@yahoo.com. And thank you very much. Okay. Thank you.